Good morning, y'all. Thanks so much for being here this morning. My name's Steve Sander. I'm with the CalRecycle Policy Office. You can call me Steve. Just take a moment to introduce some of our staff members. Joining us is Kate Wilkins and Eileen Hogue and Emily Kenta. They'll be helping me out with the AV and questions today in this presentation. So we're going to go from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. We're talking about the recycling and disposal reporting system, reporting requirements. So thanks for being with us. Let's jump right in. All right, in the event of a fire or another emergency, our relocation area will be Chavez Park, which is catty corner to this building. Follow me or another staff member out of the building, down the stairs and through the doors on the first floor, through the plaza and across the street. This meeting will be recorded and posted online as training material, so please do keep that in mind this morning. If you haven't already done so, for my folks in the room, please go ahead and sign in using the sign-in sheet when you get a chance. Thank you. Restrooms out the doors in the back. Continue walking east, and they'll be just around the corner there. We'll be going over some workshop guidelines, best practices for connecting with us via webcast, and just a little bit of a disclaimer. All right, please hold your questions until the Q&A portion of the talk. We'll have a lot of material to cover. I want to keep to the schedule, so there'll be plenty of time for Q&A when I'm finished with each respective section. We'll have some roving microphones coming around during the Q&A portions. Please speak loudly and project your voice directly into the microphone. Remember, the conversation is being recorded, so please be on your best behavior at all times. Please treat others the way they want to be treated and follow the platinum rule, at least for the duration of these proceedings. So for my webcast participants, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Throughout the workshop, you can send your questions to our email box. It's rdrs@calrecycle.ca.gov. I want to emphasize that we will be taking the questions that are, more or less directly related to the material being discussed. If there's a very specific question, we may not, we may need to follow up offline. So just please bear that in mind with respect to this workshop presentation. All right, and just a couple of statements I need to make. First of all, this is not legal advice. We're not attorneys. Even though we develop the regulations, we're human beings and we're fallible. So please excuse any mistakes that I may make in the context of this presentation. The specific applications of these rules get a little complicated sometimes, so please just remember to give me a little bit of latitude with respect to that. This workshop should not supplant your own read-through of the regulations. As a business, it's your obligation to follow all applicable regulatory requirements that pertain to you, so please do remain diligent in that regard. If you're the person undertaking the reporting for your company, you want to make sure you really understand the material being covered because the information will be needing to be aggregated and submitted in the quarterly report to CalRecycle under RDRS. So, it's up to your business to basically determine if, what the reporting requirements would look like, and then compiling and submitting that pursuant to RDRS reporting. Lastly, the regulations may be modified at some point in the future, and if that's the case, we'll make every effort to update the training material and conduct additional outreach with respect to any further changes. Of course, not anticipating any specific amendments to RDRS, of course, other than the 1383 implementation, which we won't be talking about in this workshop. So just to go over some learning objectives here. By the end of the this workshop, you should be able to basically understand or know your way around the following three things. Number one, I know what information I need to record pursuant to RDRS reporting. And number two, I know which measurement methods are acceptable to CalRecycle for data points such as tonnage, source sector, and material type. We'll go over that a little bit today, but not as much as previous workshops. So just for folks' reference, this is kind of the second or third iteration of this workshop presentation. We've had a couple other instances where we've covered basically, these exact same topics in a little bit more detail even. So we conducted one, for instance, on June 21st in Diamond Bar. Or was it might have been the 19th. I don't know. I'm getting my dates confused. But in any case, another workshop similar to this one was conducted in Diamond Bar in June. And then there was one here, about a month prior to that. And we're covering some of the similar topics here. So, if there's anything that may be left out in this one, we have some YouTube videos uploaded of our older presentations. They're kind of broken down by section. So, in case you're really hot to trot and we haven't uploaded this one yet, you can still go back and reference, some of the older workshop presentations. It'll have most the same content, but this is going to be a little bit more condensed, and we just want to have the ability to have dialogue, have folks ask questions if they're confused, to get some answers. So this workshop, while it's not substantially different in terms of content from some of the other two, this is part of our sustained effort to engage with the regulated community and really go, in my mind, above and beyond, and really open up the door for folks to ask whatever questions they may have, and get some insight into sort of what the department is thinking with respect to this. So I don't want to take up too much time, but that's essentially the reason for this workshop today. So here's a copy of the agenda, and as you can see from the next basically 2 hours, we'll be going over in relatively exhaustive detail the reporting requirements for each reporting entity type that has a reporting obligation in the RDRS system. So just to preview that, it's food waste self-haulers and contract haulers. That corresponds to Title 14, California Code of Regulations, Section 18815.4. And that's Article 9.25, Chapter 9, Division 7. That we'll talk about those two entity types, and what all the information, if you are one or you think you might be one, what you need to record and subsequently report quarterly to CalRecycle if applicable. Next, we'll be looking at transfer processing facilities and operations. Those are entities with a solid waste facilities permit, and transfer or process 100 tons or more of materials, including solid waste, on a quarterly basis. That will put you eligible for reporting as a transfer processing facility or operation. Reporting requirements can be found in Section 18815.5 of the regulatory text. Next, after that, we'll be looking at disposal facilities. That corresponds to 18815.6 of the regulatory text. Next, after that, we'll be looking at recycling and composting facilities and operations. Those are different than transfer processing facilities and operations because they don't require the entity to have a solid waste facilities permit, but they engage in recycling and or composting and sell or transfer 100 tons or more of reportable materials, or 2,500 tons exclusive CDI. So there's a couple different thresholds, and we'll be talking about the requirements a little, in detail for each respective section. That corresponds to section 18815.7 of the regulatory text. And lastly, we'll be taking a look at brokers and transporters. That's section 18815.8 of the regulatory text. So we'll see how we're doing at around 11. We'll take a quick break, about a 10-minute break, and then reconvene at 11:10. We'll see, based on how we're doing with the entity types, we may continue, or we may just throw it open for Q&A and recap, and potentially even end a bit early. I don't see that happening, but we'll see how the time goes. All right, so we're about on schedule, so I'm just going to start basically delving right in here. Food waste self-haulers and contract haulers. So we've done, to my knowledge, at least two or three training workshops specifically related to the registration and sort of the thresholds for if you're in the regulations versus out of the regulations. So, I'm just going to sort of speed through this. Forgive me if I'm going quickly, but there's plenty of training material online that'll help you determine, sort of what entity type you are. And we also have an automated tool on our website. If you go to tinyurl.com/rdrs-tool. Again, that's tinyurl.com/rdrs-tool for any entity type, basically, that is involved with the regulations. You can answer a few questions, kind of like, the IRS website has some tools that'll help you determine, like your tax filing status and whatnot. This is similar along those lines. You put in information about your entity, or what your business facility or operation engages in, and then based on the answers to those questions, it'll spit out basically a preliminary determination according to the regulations. So I urge you to try that if you have any questions about, am I in the regulations, am I out of the regulations? Also, watching our prior workshops, which are available on our RDRS webpage. So to get there, you can go to the CalRecycle homepage, and under the In Focus tab, there's this new recycling and disposal reporting sort of news graphic sort of blurb, and you can click on Learn More, and that's the easiest way to get to the CalRecycle RDRS webpage. From there, you can sign up for a web pass, or actually log into the system to complete the registration. So just to preface this again, the reporting system aspect hasn't actually been moved into available to the public status. We're still undertaking some IT development last steps in order to get that out there. So the reporting system is not yet active, but the registration portal is, and that's the same place that you'll also want to go to file the quarterly report. So it's the same data system, just the reporting aspect hasn't been implemented in it yet. We've gotten a few questions about that, so just wanted to sort of preface that before I get much further. But anyway, turning our attention back to the slide here, and this is specifically discussing the reporting requirements for both contract haulers and food waste self-haulers. Above these thresholds, and this is on a per quarter basis, you would need to probably register and report pursuant to RDRS. So actually, I'm going to cover food waste self-haulers first. That's sort of the third one down here. Food waste self-haulers who haul 13 or more cubic yards of their own food waste to a facility or operation not owned by them. above that, at or above that threshold, you would need to register and report as a food waste self-hauler. So these reporting requirements were enacted subsequent to the passage of AB 901 for those keeping score at home. It was a part of AB 1103 DOD that required this food waste self-haulers reporting in RDRS. So that has been implemented in the regulatory text. Now, contract haulers, a lot of people, there's some misconceptions out there, but contract haulers actually have a very limited role, most of them, with respect to RDRS. So it's only contract haulers who either take material out of state at or more than 100 tons of reportable materials out of state, or 50 tons or more of reportable material to direct land application in state or out of state would be the threshold above which registration and reporting would be required for that entity. So contract hauler, basically defined, is a person who picks up material from a generator and again delivers that material to out of state or to direct land application. Otherwise, don't report to the department if it's in state only. Yeah, so you'd still need to provide required information to the receiving facility. However, you just wouldn't be interfacing with CalRecycle if you were in an in-state contract hauler who doesn't take material to land application above the 50 tons per quarter tonnage threshold. So by definition, you'd only report on outflows, since if you're a contract hauler, food waste self-hauler, you pick up material from a generator. So you wouldn't be reporting on what you receive. You only be reporting on basically where you took material. And so for contract haulers, this is necessary because they're essentially, with respect to the first two flows I identified, they're going to be the last entities who basically handle the material prior to it leaving the state. So they're going to have the best information, or they may, in some instances, be the only person who is going to be reporting on that material. So in those instances, yes, reporting is required for the contract hauler. So we'll talk about what's required both for in-state and out-of-state for these entities, and let's do that right now. Okay, so for food waste self-hauler, I'm going to try to, this is basically going to be the bulk of my presentation, is going to be along the lines of these tables, if you will. So I'll just kind of briefly go over the structure and then, kind of go from there. So, because these apply to multiple slides that I'll be giving throughout the presentation. So the furthest column on the left is whether the entity is reporting on the inflow or the outflow. When I use that terminology, inflow means what you take in, outflow means what you send out. So as I just mentioned, since they're basically picking up material from a generator, or they are a generator, they're not receiving, they're not receiving material specifically. I mean, it wouldn't be the case that they would be required to report on what they receive. It's only on what they send out and to where. So we're only dealing, again, with outflow with respect to food waste self-hauler. And then the next column to the right, in-state / out-of-state, that basically, for each column on the right-hand side, the next column to the right, is it in-state or is it out-of-state, the flow that we're discussing. next column to the right, must report. So these are different streams of material. So if you're sending material, for instance, to solid waste disposal, that would be the stream under which you would indicate that material was sent. And then for each stream, next column to the right is what it must be reported for that. So as we go down, we'll kind of be going, left to right in terms of reading order, and then kind of down the table, row by row, for the next, several slides. All right. So, and then for each of these, I'm going to sort of give as best I can a kind of real world examples of this. Okay, so taking a look here in terms of in-state solid waste disposal for a food waste self-hauler, we've brought up the example now several times of this rural ski resort that that separates food, their own food waste. And now let's take the hypothetical situation of they're sending that material to the landfill for solid waste disposal, and it was 13 or more cubic yards of their own food waste. So what would they report to the department? Well, when they file a quarterly report, they would indicate how many tons of food waste. That's the material type, since it is a food waste self-hauler, was sent to whatever landfill it was. Let's say Anderson landfill, and so they would say it was, for instance, 150 tons of food waste was sent to Anderson landfill, RDRS number, RD10059. There's a way this not kind of to give a preview for folks. There is going to be a way for entities to look up the RDRS number, of other entities. So, even if you didn't know the exact RDRS number of the landfill, if you knew the name of it and they were registered, as most landfills are, you would be able to basically autofill the rest of that information in the system. So now, if that's all they did, the food waste self-hauler was take material to the landfill for solid waste disposal, that would be the extent of the reporting, and they would be basically that is sufficient. That completes the quarterly report. Now, let's say they do some other stuff with it. So the next row down, they take the food waste to a composting facility. Let's say it's the Blossom something or other. So you would indicate 150 tons was sent to Blossom Composting, and that you would provide the RDRS number and contact information of that facility. And if it's already registered, that information would autofill. All right. So now let's say you're taking it to in-state end user. Now, there may be some specifics here, whether reporting is even required in this circumstance. So you would need to consult section 18815.3, subsection C, to see if this flow might even be excluded by regulation. But in the event that reporting is required for this stream, let's say it was sent to some kind of Soylent Green factory or something like that, where it was turned into some kind of new food. I'm just kind of grasping at straws here, but to give a real world example, but they would indicate 150 tons of food waste was sent to this manufacturing and packaging facility. So that would be and that were located in Kern County. So that would be the reporting for that. All right. Now turning our attention to sort of the second half of the table, where it says out of state. It's very much the same for solid waste disposal. If they were to take it to an in-state landfill versus an out-of-state landfill, the reporting would look exactly identical. 150 tons of food waste sent to Lockwood landfill in Nevada. So that would basically be the same kind of reporting as in-state landfill. If they were to take it to a out-of-state recycling and composting facility, the reporting requirements are scaled back a little bit. We don't require the end user not the end user category, the contact information or RDRS number of that out-of-state facility. We just want the 150 tons of food waste was sent to Nevada for recycling and composting. That would be the extent of the reporting for that. And then out-of-state end user, similar to in-state end user. So I'm not going to sort of belabor that. All right, let's take a moment, see if there's any questions.
We have a question regarding contract haulers from Gerald Richardson of Republic Services.
Oh, I'm not quite there yet, so I'm going to cover it on. Let's see if I answered Gerald's question on the next slide, and if not, please feel free to chime in at that point.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right. So next. Oh, okay. One moment here. I think we have a question from Larry Sweetser in the room.
Yes, Larry Sweetser on behalf of rural counties. On region, it's not a defined term in there. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Certainly, region corresponds to section 18815.3, subsection K. Region is defined as either the county, if it's in the state of California, the state if it's out of state, or the country if it's out of country. Thank you for that question. And then also in terms of, I might as well take a second and define end user category. There's 6 different types of end user categories that you would indicate, and if an entity were to engage in multiple end user category type of activities, you would default to the one that that they did most commonly, or represented the operation. So I know that's been brought up in the previous workshop. So I'm going to sort of repeat that as well. So 6 different kinds of end user categories, manufacturing and packaging being one of them. I think I might have made a reference to that at some point. Fuel consumer end user category, material consumer end user category, construction end user category, land application. I think I've alluded to that, and inert debris fill. Those are going to be the 6 primary end user categories that operate under RDRS. All right, now again, contract haulers, and I've kind of covered a little bit of this in the intro, but essentially, again, they only report if they take material to direct land application in-state or out-of-state, or out-of-state, or take material to out-of-state in excess of 100 tons per quarter. So here's what to report for basically each of the reportable flows for the department. First, to cover the in-state, so again, land application only. If they picked up material from a generator in excess of 50 tons per quarter, they would need to register and report as a contract hauler. They would indicate, for instance, 150 tons of whatever material it is, for instance, food waste or biosolids or something like that. And they would say it was taken to end user category of land application. in Tuolumne County. So that would be essentially, if that was all they did as a contract hauler, that would be the extent of the quarterly reporting. So, not a whole lot there. Now, let's say they are kind of they operate in the far north of California, say, Wairika or thereabouts. And most of their business involved taking material across the border, into Oregon, and that's basically a lot of their business. So let's say that they're a disposal or a trash hauling company or a trash and recycling hauling company, and they're taking residential black bin material to Dry Creek landfill in Oregon, and they did more than 100 tons of that per quarter. They would need to register and report as a contract hauler. And so what would be involved in with respect to solid waste disposal? Well, quarterly they would provide the tons by jurisdiction of origin and source sector, and the RDRS number / contact information of the receiving out-of-state facility. So we made reference to Dry Creek landfill. So it would be, if all they did was pick up material from Wairika and all they did was residential black bin material, they would file a quarterly report that indicated, 200 tons of solid waste, of which 100% is Wairika in terms of jurisdiction of origin, and 100% of that was residential, and it was taken to Dry Creek landfill. That would be, again, the extent of the reporting. Now, if they took material from, different jurisdictions, they would need to provide and a breakdown in terms of the percentage collected from each jurisdiction. And if they collected from different, multiple source sectors, so there's a residential, single-family residential, that's one source sector. A multifamily / commercial is another source sector, and then self-hauled is the third source sector. So you would need to provide a breakdown quarterly for each source, for of the material that was handled, percentage breakdown, which came from which source sector, or how many tons came from each source sector. And you can also, do that as basically as a percentage breakdown. Right, now let's say they take residential yard waste, so green bin material from citizens in Wairika, and that was taken to the Dry Creek landfill for beneficial reuse as alternative daily cover. What would you need to report for that? Well, you would need to report the 200 tons of green material. Potential beneficial reuse was sent to Dry Creek landfill, 100% of which originated from Wairika. So that would be, how you would account for that flow. Now, let's say they take concrete or something, and they use it in slope stabilization / erosion control at the landfill. So it's not being disposed. There's beneficial. It's being reused beneficially at the out-of-state landfill. They would indicate that they sent 200 tons of concrete to Dry Creek landfill as a non-green potential beneficial reuse stream. So that would be how to account for that material flow. All right, now let's say they take blue bin material to an out-of-state recycling or composting facility. again, the reporting requirements for this stream were scaled back, so you don't need to provide the RDRS number and contact information of the out-of-state recycling / composting facility. You would only need to indicate, for instance, 200 tons of, let's say it's blue bin material, unprocessed. So at that point, you would probably call it something along the lines of mixed recyclables. 200 tons of mixed recyclables was sent to Oregon. If you were a contract hauler and those were your operations, that would be the extent of the reporting on that. So again, fairly straightforward. Designated waste disposal. So let's say, this is material that's been had a water board waste class 2 designation applied to it, meaning that it can only be disposed in class 2 or above landfill. This is material such as friable asbestos or what is that? Dredge or foundry spoils or certain kinds of contaminated sediment or contaminated soil that's too toxic for a class 3 landfill. Would need to, if it's designated waste, and that's how it's being sent out to an out-of-state, RCRA class 2 landfill. They would indicate that it was a flow of designated waste, and then they indicate how many tons and, to the location to which it was sent. Not entirely sure that, this will be the method of reporting, but, in any case, we wanted to build in some flexibility to account for, this kind of specialized or loads of material that are taken out of state for disposal. Similar along those lines, disaster debris that is taken out of state, you would indicate, how many tons of that and to where the material was sent for disaster debris. And then, so designated waste and disaster debris are not by jurisdiction of origin, in contrast to other kinds of solid waste. So just kind of FYI on that. And then lastly, out of state, if they're taking it to end user, out of state, it would be the tons by material type, end user category by region. And again, in some cases, since it's a material taken from a generator and delivered directly to an end user, there may not even be a reporting obligation in some circumstances. So just bear that in mind. It's actually more likely than not that there wouldn't be a reporting requirement for that specific one, unless it were something like land application. So, if that's the case, we'll if you have any questions about the flow of haulers taking material directly to end users, that's where it gets a little bit tricky with respect to the regulations. So if you do have any questions about that, we can follow up offline, or if it's real brief, I might take a stab at it here. But let's cruise on over and see if that helped the gentleman or from online, or whether, there's some additional explanation I can provide.
So perhaps you can just reply directly if a landfill is also operating a hauling company, for instance, for public services, and it sounds like they're only bringing material, or material is staying in state. So our hauling company hauls to our landfill and our MRF only. Does the hauling company need to register?
Oh, right. So if it's in state, you wouldn't need to report taking the material to the in-state landfill. However, I know a little bit about this gentleman's operations as a result of my having worked with Imperial County over the years. for this gentleman, the material is actually taken out of state to South Yuma County landfill and processing. So, the fact that it is taken out of state to Yuma and to that out of state landfill, if those Republic Services vehicles were picking up material directly from a generator and taking it across state lines to that facility, absolutely, yes, reporting is required. That's essentially what we just covered, in this entire table. So, to the extent that that's taking place and it were over the threshold, yes, absolutely, there would be a reporting obligation. So thank you very much for the question, Mr. Richardson. Happy to follow up with you a little bit later or in more detail if you would like. So thank you very much, sir. Now
I do have one more question about end user categories.
Please go ahead.
So does anaerobic digestion fall under recycling and composting end user category?
Okay, so a little bit of a terminology thing I should clarify first. Anaerobic digestion is a recycling activity. It's not an end user. So recyclers are not end users. Recyclers are people who create intermediate products. Such as plastic flake, plastic pellets, metal ingots, things like that. It's the end users who use that material to make new products. So anaerobic digestion is a recycling activity that results in the creation of intermediate products. Now, what they do with that digestate, that would be the end user, the person who uses the digestate, the person who uses the renewable biogas is generated from anaerobic digestion. The anaerobic digestion would fall under the reporting requirements for recycling and composting. So that would correspond to section 18815.7 of the regulatory text. So, an anaerobic digestion facility would not report as an end user. Rather, they would report as a recycler/composter. So they've been kind of been placed within the composting realm of things rather than the end user, if that makes sense. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that opportunity to draw a distinction there. So. Very good. Let's take a peek and see if there's anything from the audience at this time. No. All right. Then I'm going to continue rolling along unless there's anything else that's come in. Nope. All right. Very good. Thank you. Next, we're going to take a lot of time here, and I really want to make sure that we exhaustively cover this because transfer processing facilities and operations are perhaps one of the most complex, if not the most complex reporting entity type. And not only do they have to tell the department about what goes out of the facility, just like all the other reporting entities, to some extent, they need to provide some information about actually what goes into the facility. So just to recap, transfer processing facilities and operations must report to the department if they transfer or process 100 tons or more of reportable materials per quarter, and have a solid waste facilities permit that corresponds to their transfer processing operations. So that's in contrast to recycling and composting facilities that may process material, but they do not have that solid waste facilities permit. So if that's the case, they would report as a recycler/composter, and the reporting requirements are a bit different, perhaps a little bit more scaled back. Well, they are scaled back. So it's also, there's also, I should mention this other threshold, if the transfer processing facility or operation exclusively handles a construction, demolition, and inert debris, the reporting threshold is raised from 100 tons to 2,500 tons. But if they start handling CDI and other materials as well, that de minimis threshold will roll back to 100 tons. All right, so yeah, if you've got the notification, registration standard, or full permit, and you engage in those activities, you would need to register and report as a transfer processor, in contrast to, perhaps a recycler composter. Now, it may even be the case that you'll have a transfer processor co-located with a recycler, in which case the transfer processor can take the lead on reporting for the dependent recycling activity. This will be helpful for instances where there's a line where mixed solid waste is processed, otherwise known as a dirty MRF. Or mixed waste processing facility, to use a little bit nicer term. And then they're also co-located with perhaps a single stream recycling facility that, is their contamination is a little bit more under control, and they don't need a solid waste facilities permit for those operations. However, those operations do result in 100 tons or more of recyclable materials going out. They could, aggregate that dependent cleaner recycling operation with the transfer processing facility. And we've discussed this in prior workshops. I think there was one on April 17th or thereabouts, where I demonstrated how to register a complex site in RDRS in a webinar format, so you can follow along and basically do the steps I did. And there was a whole process we went through about making determination about what all is required, and then actually inputting that into the system. So in case there's a little bit of confusion on this, again, I would urge you to go to the website and reference that prior training material, where I discuss in great detail what is entailed, by a complex site with the dependent recycling activities. So please reference that if you're confused. All right. So here's some examples of who's in, and this is basically taken from the regulations text verbatim. So I'll just give folks a moment to go over this here. Actually, for accessibility purposes, I should probably just read this off. Contaminated soil operations, inert debris processing facilities, type A, type B. Inert debris type A processing operations, non-hazardous ash transfer processing operations, small, medium, large volume CDI processing operations, limited volume transfer processing operations, small volume transfer stations, medium/large volume transfer processing facilities, secondary material processing facilities and operations, glass container processing operation. These are all permit types that are given out by CalRecycle. Direct transfer facilities, sealed container transfer operations, again, as I alluded to, mixed waste processing facilities and material recovery facilities that require a solid waste facilities permit. So you can look at that list at section 18815.3B3. Basically has that same list in the regulations. That's a guide. So basically, these are entities who we think, if they met or exceeded de minimis tonnage threshold and had a permit corresponding to one of these activities, the reporting and registration would be required. So let's get right down to it. Now, with respect to transfer processors, they can get there. We need to make a distinction here in terms of. So first of all, this is how to report material that you receive as a transfer processor. Now, transfer processors can either receive material from other transfer processors, or they can, of course, get material in from direct haul, meaning people take the waste or material directly to the transfer processing facility or operation. When I say direct haul, it's basically anyone but another transfer processor. So the reason for this distinction is because much of the information that would have been reported by that has already been reported upstream by the upstream transfer processor. It's to a large extent when the upstream transfer processor sends material to that downstream transfer processor, in many cases we try to retain that information within the system, so things aren't having to be duplicated, and you don't have to enter the same information again, potentially with less granularity, because they weren't the people who initially received the material. So a lot of times we're getting the information, with respect to solid waste origins and things like that. We're collecting that from the most upstream facility, and then sort of calculating that as it goes through the system, even if it flows through multiple transfer processing facilities or operations. So in terms of best practices, if you're a transfer processor who typically receives material from other transfer processors, what you may want to do is, at some point work something out so that, they submit their report first. That way, you as the downstream transfer processor can basically, there'll be an option to, report, you would log in and see that other upstream facility had already reported sending material to you. So they've filled in a lot of information, that you would otherwise have needed to fill in. So you would simply accept those, or perhaps even modify what the upstream facility report is sending you. So that might be helpful in terms of best practices for engaging with, the reporting system. That might be something that facilities may want to work out amongst themselves, just to kind of flag that a little bit for a little later when the reporting system actually opens up. Because as I alluded to, when another facility reports sending you material, in whatever information they typed in will seamlessly pass along to your reporting, potentially even with some modifications that you would have the ability to make. Now, if you were modified, if they said they sent 1,000 tons and you modified that down to 0, the system might detect an anomaly and may ask if you're certain about that, and it may even alert staff to take a follow up on that. But unless it's something really severe, like several orders of magnitude, we're going to let folks kind of work things out amongst themselves to the extent possible. Let's, without further ado, kind of go through this chart. So let's say, let's start at the top with designated waste. An upstream transfer processor reported or sent, you as another transfer processor, a load of designated waste. So you would indicate, I received 1,000 tons of designated waste from this other upstream transfer processor, and you would provide the RDRS number of that receiving transfer processor as applicable. Same thing for disaster waste. Disaster debris. Same thing for non-green beneficial reuse, and even green material beneficial reuse and solid waste. If you're receiving that from another transfer processor, you would still only need to report the tons, because in the instance of green and solid waste, the jurisdiction of origin information already captured by the upstream transfer processor, so there's no need to input that again. That jurisdiction of origin information will be passed down to the next transfer processor along the line. So we'll talk about how, when it's actually sent out the back, you can change some of the jurisdictional allocations as appropriate. Well, we may talk about it, but we'll see how it goes. So that basically covers when an upstream transfer processor is sending you a downstream transfer processor material. What if you're just taking in material from, for instance, generators or self-haulers coming to your facility, contract haulers coming to your facility, even recycling facilities bringing material to your facility, but not other transfer processors. So how would you report? Well, for the disaster and designated waste, it's similar. You still only report the tons. No need to track the jurisdiction of origin when you're receiving direct haul flows of designated waste or disaster debris. However, if local ordinances, require the jurisdiction or something, you would of course need to follow that in that instance. Let's say that you're accepting non-green material for potential beneficial reuse at landfill. You would indicate how many tons you received of each material type of non-green material for potential beneficial reuse. Now, let's say you're accepting green beneficial reuse. Let's say green material potential beneficial reuse. Let's say green bin residential green bin material for use as ADC or alternative daily cover at landfill, and it met the Title 27 definition of green material as ADC Section 20690. You would provide the tons of that material that you received by the jurisdiction of origin. So 500 tons of green material potential beneficial reuse I accepted. 25% Hayward, 25% Livermore, 50% Oakland. That would be the jurisdiction of origin breakdown. And then for solid waste received from direct haul for a transfer processor, that's probably the most data points for this stream here. So you would indicate, 500 tons of solid waste, 25% of which came from Livermore, 25% Hayward, 50% Oakland, and then provide as well the breakdown in terms of source sector for the material received from direct haul of solid waste. So, 50% commercial, 50% residential, 0% self-haul. That's just a hypothetical situation, just to impart a little flavor into this. All right. Let's see. I'm just going to cover the next couple of these, and then we'll open it up for questions. So thank you for being patient. All right. Now, we just spent some time talking about how to account for material that the transfer processor takes in. What about the material? How do you account for how you sent out material out of the transfer processor? Well, it depends on whether it's going in-state or out-of-state, and it depends on the type of stream that is being sent through. Just to take sort of the most basic example, at the very top row, they're transferring, their transfer station, they transfer material, solid waste to the landfill. How would you account for that? And in terms of reporting for a quarterly basis, you would report the tons by jurisdiction of origin and source sector, and the RDRS number and contact information of the receiving solid waste facility. So if a transfer station sends to two different facilities, they would need to provide both of those, and how many were sent to each, and what the jurisdiction of origin breakdown was for each. Now, source sector, I believe, is still an aggregate for all material sent out. I could be wrong about that. It could be source sector for each destination facility it's sent to. I'm not 100% sure about that. So I apologize for that. But in any case, the source sector is more sort of at an aggregate level for all the material that was sent out. What was the breakdown in terms of percent residential, commercial, and self-hauled? And again, this is just for solid waste. You don't need to do source sector for recycling or composting. Or any other kind of material. It's just for solid waste. And same thing for jurisdiction of origin, with the small exception of green material beneficial reuse. So it's never the case that recyclable material or compostable material needs to be tracked by jurisdiction of origin. That's not what the regulations require, or so I'm just going to leave it there at that point. Next, let's say they've, in addition to transferring material, that this facility also processes recyclable material and sends that to a recycling and composting facility. So they would indicate tons, so let's say 500 tons by material type, let's say plastic 3 through 7, and RDRS number, contact information of the receiving recycling facility or composting facility. Now, it's possible, because of the way that we allow facilities to aggregate dependent sub-activities, that, for instance, it may be the case, it may turn out that the transfer processor is also reporting on behalf of a composter, and that composter produces finished compost that's sent to end users. Well, they would indicate that they sent 500 tons of finished compost to end user category, manufacturing and packaging. If they sent it to a bagger of compost or something like that, who sells it, at Home Depot or something along those lines. So in that event, they would report, 500 tons of finished compost sent to manufacturing, packaging, end user in whichever county it is. So let's just say, Lake County, just to, use an example. So that sort of covers the end users one. Moving down the fourth row down, non-green but beneficial reuse. Let's say they, send. Let's use the concrete example again. They send concrete as beneficial reuse to the landfill for construction or for slope stabilization. They would indicate that they sent let's say 5,000 tons of concrete to, Altamont landfill. And so, as we talked about before, you can either type in Altamont and it'll fill in the RDRS number and contact information, other applicable form fields, or you can enter the RDRS number straight away, and it'll basically do the same. All right, so moving down, let's say they're sending green material to the landfill for potential beneficial reuse. As I alluded to at the top here, this is another instance where you would provide the jurisdiction of origin breakdown, and that is to account for come Jan 1, 2020 with AB 1594. Jurisdictions that send green material to alternative daily cover that will come Jan 1, 2020 be considered disposal, not diversion. So we need to find a way to account for those jurisdictions that are still sending green material to landfill, and then assign, basically rather than counting that as diversion, we need to be able to associate that with a particular jurisdiction as a disposal. So that's why we require, when it comes to green material, potential beneficial reuse sent to a disposal facility, specifically a landfill. For green material for alternative daily cover, that's when we would require the jurisdiction of origin and also the RDRS number, contact information, just like everything else. All right, let's say they sent material to a broker. So I don't know, let's say they bail, number 1 and 2 plastic, and then send that to a broker who, finds a buyer for that somewhere else, and they don't control, the transfer processor doesn't control where that goes or anything. That they just sell the material to the broker. Well, they would indicate that they sent 500 tons of plastic number 1 and 2, if that's how it was sold, to the RDRS number, contact information of that broker. So that's fairly straightforward. And then the next two, disaster debris and designated waste. You would simply, for disposal, you would simply indicate the tons of each, respective one and where it was sent. So RDRS number and contact information of the receiving solid waste facility. All right, so that's how to account for in-state flows of material coming out of a transfer station. I think I'm gonna keep chugging along here. With respect to transfer processors going out of state, let's see. Now it looks like on mine it's a little bit cut off, but no, it's coming through pretty well on the presentation. Yeah, again, outflows, we're looking at outflows, so what was sent out of this facility, and we're talking about out of state. So this is, again, in contrast to what was reported on the last slide. So actually, much of this is the same. There's only a couple key differences, which I'll highlight here. So I'm not going to go down each row. I'm just going to basically be pointing out any changes. So really the only change between how to report for in-state and out-of-state is the recycling and composting. So similar to what we've discussed for the food waste self-haulers and contract haulers, taking material to an out-of-state recycling or composting facility. The requirements are scaled back once again for transfer processors as well. They're not going to provide the contact information of the out-of-state recycling and composting facility. They're only going to indicate that we sent 500 tons of plastic 3 through 7 to Nevada or to People's Republic of China, if that's where they went with it. So everything else is basically the same that I can tell. But if there are other distinctions that I didn't cover, I apologize for that. right, let's take a moment and see if there are any questions about transfer processor. I mean, the application of these rules get a little complicated, so I hope there are some questions.
So we do have a question from Deirdre Bingham, Orange County Sanitation District. It's a bit long. I'm pretty sure the crux of the question is if a transfer processor is receiving a material from a facility that doesn't have its own RDRS reporting requirements, how do they alternatively report the source if there's no RDRS number?
Okay. So let's turn our attention to a couple slides ago here. I think you would. So I tried to bifurcate this in terms of material received from other transfer processors specifically, and then basically everyone else who's not a transfer processor. So you would most likely follow the requirements for this bottom half. Even if it's coming from a facility that's not a transfer processor, there's still a method to account for those flows. So let's say and this might become a little bit more common. I don't know, based on the recycling markets or something. We have a recycling facility, so not a transfer processor. They may bail up material, and turns out it doesn't have a market to go to, so it's sent to a disposal facility. So bailed up, number 6 plastic or number 7 plastic. If they can't find a market for that, it's got to go to disposal. So that's the recycling facility would, they may take that to a transfer processor for disposal, in which case they would follow, the transfer processor would report according to the very last row that they received, solid waste for disposal. They would get the jurisdiction of origin, so wherever the host facility was located, and the source sector of that, probably commercial because it's being handled by a facility. So that may help. It's only the case where you would identify the RDRS number of the facility you received it from for other transfer processors. For the direct haul, we basically treat that as the same, if that helps, but happy to follow up.
We can follow up more specifically offline.
All right. Very good. Any other questions in the room, perhaps? All right. Very good. I'm going to move on and let's see how we're doing on time here. Okay. We have plenty of time. So if there are any other questions about transfer processors and you didn't get a chance to ask them at this segment, please, feel free to send that to the RDRS at CalRecycle box, and we'll take a moment to review some of those prior to going on break. Next, we're going to be looking at disposal facilities and the RDRS requirements for those. So these are landfills, transformation facilities, EMSW conversion facilities that don't exclusively convert source-separated tires or biomass, waste tire disposal facilities, and inert debris Type A, Type B disposal facilities, and industrial waste co-disposal facilities that dispose any tonnage in the state of California. They'll need to report on both what comes into the facility as well as anything that may be sent out of the facility. I know it's kind of counterintuitive to think that a landfill, we think about that as kind of the final resting place for material, but it may be the case that actually material flows off the site as well, particularly when it has aggregated recycling activities built in, for instance, a composting facility. That's becoming more and more common. You'll see landfills start to get into composting. So in that instance, there would be products moving out of the landfill, and there would be a reporting obligation with respect to that. Let's see. There's also ways to account for on-site use of the beneficial reuse material as well as the waste that was disposed. So I want to take our time here. I want to really make sure we cover this as exhaustively as possible. Please don't hesitate to send in your questions if you have them. Great. So similar to transfer processor, we require the disposal facility to tell us about the material that they're receiving. So like the transfer processor is bifurcated by material accepted from transfer processors and material received from the direct haul, meaning from self-haulers, contract haulers, recycling or composting facilities, other disposal facilities even perhaps. Basically any entity that's not another transfer processor. So when it comes to accepting material from transfer process, I'm going to cover sort of the bottom half of the chart first and discuss sort of what I mean by material received by from other transfer processors. So the way the RDRS is designed, there's staggered due dates involved, meaning that the transfer processors submit their reports prior to the disposal facilities even opening up or having access to their reports. And the reason for doing so is because disposal facilities are basically, final deposition of the waste. So they're kind of the last to report. So we want the transfer processors to file their reports indicating that they sent material to the disposal facility and have their reporting be completed prior to the disposal facility opening up their reporting. Because what we want to see is, the disposal facility logs in and they're greeted with basically all of the transfer processors that have reported sending them material. In that event, they would simply need to accept or modify the incoming tonnages as appropriate. The jurisdiction of origin information will already have been recorded by the transfer processor and passed along via that report to the disposal facility, thus, trimming down everyone's time and effort having to input the jurisdiction of origin information yet again. The most granular information comes from the most upstream facility. That information we want to be passed down to, as it flows through, multiple facilities, even prior to being disposed. So that's the reason for the nature for, that was how we designed the architecture, was to allow for basically the flows to kind of come about, and then the disposal facility can basically say, yep, we sure did, we got that. We got that from that transfer processor, and since they already have the information about where the origins of that waste, we can go ahead and apply those to essentially what ended up being disposed. So there is a method and a reason for all of this. And I think that this will facilitate, more granular and better reporting on the origins of solid waste, even when it flows through multiple facilities prior to arriving at the disposal facility. So, thanks for sitting through my spiel on that. Basically, turning our attention to the first half of the table, direct haul. Now, this is going to be material where the self hauler and contract hauler, they basically drive directly to the landfill. So now it's the case that actually the landfill has the most granular information about where that waste is coming from, because they're receiving material from the from generators or from haulers. Basically, they're initially receiving that material for just for all intents and purposes. Oh, this might be a good time to mention as well, and this applies for transfer processors too. But if you notice on our table, there's no recycling and composting. You may think, what's up with that? Well, there's a very good reason for that. We don't require the facilities to report on recyclable and compostable material that they receive. Only what they send out. So we're actually precluded from asking about that. And I don't really want to go into it in a lot of great detail, but just bear in mind that you do not have to report on any recyclable or compostable materials that you receive. Only the solid waste and disposal related materials. So that applies equally to transfer processors. If you accept clean recyclables, you would not have to report on that inbound, how many tons you received on the inbound of recyclable or compostable material, only on the outbound. Excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so again, so let's turn our attention back to the first half of the chart here. So let's say you take the landfill accepts direct haul, designated waste, or disaster waste. They would just indicate how many tons of that they received for the quarter, for each of those streams. So if they took in, 500 tons of designated waste from the direct haul, they would just indicate we accepted 500 tons of designated waste on the direct haul. Same thing with disaster debris. Same thing even for non-green material. Material accepted for beneficial reuse. If they accepted, let's say that that transfer processor that we just went through the hypothetical example with, the 5,000 tons of concrete, they would indicate that we received 5,000 tons of concrete. Actually, that's a bad example. Because that was to transfer processor and this is direct haul. But let's say 5,000 tons of concrete was brought to them via direct haul. They would indicate 5,000 tons was received from direct haul. Not much more complicated than that. 5,000 tons of concrete, but sorry. Let's say they received residential green bin yard waste material from direct haul. They would indicate the tons by jurisdiction of origin of material that is green material that's accepted for beneficial reuse at the landfill. And then finally, solid waste, since they're basically the most upstream facility, they in terms of getting material from direct haul, they would need to ask, where is the waste coming from, and also would need to provide on an aggregated quarterly basis the source sector of all the direct hauled solid waste they receive. So, a third residential, a third commercial, a third self-haul, for instance, was received for that quarter of direct haul solid waste. Now, like I mentioned, if you're getting material from other transfer processors, to a large extent, the information will just be passed along through the system. So you'll only need to report that you accepted, this many tons from from this transfer processor of designated waste. You accepted this many tons of disaster debris from this transfer processor. You accepted, this many tons of non-green material for beneficial reuse from this transfer processor. You accepted, this many tons of green material for beneficial reuse from this transfer processor. You accepted this many tons of solid waste from this transfer processor. You don't have to, again, re-ask about the jurisdiction of origin or anything like that, because the transfer processor upstream has already taken care of that for you, and it just imported into your report now. So that essentially covers, with respect to a disposal facility, how you would report them on the material that you receive. Now, how about material you send out? Okay, so solid waste if you're sending material out for solid waste disposal that you received, now you're not really functioning like a disposal facility. You're functioning more like a transfer processor. We would want the disposal facility to report according to the reporting requirements for transfer processors sending material outbound, and so that involves providing the tons by jurisdiction of origin and source sector and the RDRS number of the facility or facilities that the solid waste is being sent. So, it's unlikely that the disposal facility would act in this manner, but if they did, they would need to, retain as much of that information as possible so that it can be passed along to the transfer processor or to the other disposal facility. So we're not losing any information because it's being routed through the disposal facility. Now, how do you account for a solid waste that's generated as a result of on-site activities? So not all disposal facilities are landfills. Transformation facilities are disposal facilities. They generate material on-site, solid waste that's ash, and that would need to be accounted for. So you would say, 700 tons of ash were sent to, this ash monofill landfill, to give a hypothetical example, and then provide the RDRS contact information of that facility. Now, let's say the landfill does engage in some processing of recyclables, or they scavenge metals from the working face or something along those lines. And then they proceeded to send those materials off to an in-state recycling or composting facility or operation. They would provide, for instance, 650 tons of, non-ferrous metals or ferrous metals were sent to this recycling facility, Sims, at on Stockton Boulevard, and provide the appropriate contact information for that facility. Now, let's say they sent material to end users. So they, to give an example of that, let's say you have a composting facility that's aggregated with the disposal facility. They produce finished compost that's sent to end users. Well, you would indicate that 750 tons of finished compost were sent to end user category manufacturing and packaging located in Inyo County, just to give a hypothetical example. So that would be, how to account for that material that's produced by the dependent sub-activity, just to give an example there for a little flavor. Now, let's say they took in too much concrete, 7,500 tons. Boy, that's a lot of concrete, and we can't use all of that. But we're going to send it to our, sister landfill located a few miles down the road. In that event, you would basically say, we sent 3,500 tons of that concrete, non-green material for beneficial reuse to this other facility. Now, if you sent out, let's say you took in too much green material, ADC, and wanted to send that somewhere else, they would indicate, they would indicate the tons by jurisdiction of origin and the RDRS number contact information. Again, the jurisdiction of origin being necessary for the AB 1594 count as disposal thing come Jan 1, 2020, but in any case, it's still being required for now. All right, now let's take an example of they're sending it to a broker. So I don't know, perhaps they've scavenged some really good material that's good enough to be sent to a broker. Well, you would indicate, how many tons of whatever material that was sent to the RDRS number contact information of that broker or transporter. Now, disaster debris and designated waste, if they're sending that off, they would need to provide, the tons by material type and the RDRS number and contact information of that receiving probably a disposal facility if it's being sent for disposal. So jurisdiction of origin is not required for disaster and designated, even though it's a kind of solid waste. But the jurisdiction is not required for those specific outflow streams, or even on the inflow for that matter. We're not tracking those by jurisdiction of origin. All right. Now look at this is out of state. So this is you're a disposal facility and you're sending material out of state. Well, again, the reporting requirements are essentially very much the same. Again, the only exception is that recycling and composting. The reporting requirements are scaled back such that you don't need to provide the contact information or RDRS number of that out-of-state recycling facility. So you would only indicate, for instance, 500 tons of plastic 3 through 7 was sent to Nevada. Otherwise, the reporting requirements are the same as in-state. So I'm not going to cover all of those in great detail, as they're identical to the in-state that I already just covered. All right, questions about disposal facilities, if we have any, either from in person, not seeing anything, or online. Please go ahead if you have. We don't have any. Okay. Hopefully that made sense to folks. And again, you can reference some of the prior workshop materials. If you have any other questions about that. Now, I think folks might be waiting here, particularly in the room with bated breath, about this next section. So we're going to cover the reporting requirements for recycling and composting facilities and operations. So these are entities who do recycling or composting as defined in Article 9.25, Section 18815.2 of the CCR, and they meet or exceed the de minimis tonnage threshold of 100 tons per quarter for material sold or transferred. And recyclers and composters do not report on what they receive, only on what they send out. So our requirements for them are fairly simple. We'll cover what to keep track of for each outflow that is sent to either reporting entities, end users, or out of state. Again, recycling facility defined any facility or operation that recycles material. Recycling, you can look at, has the same meaning as Section 40180 of the PRC, and it is also defined, and a person who engages in activities described in Section 18815.2A43 is considered a recycler under these regulations. So we're not talking about any other regulations. We're just talking about Article 9.25. What does recycling mean specifically in the context of this? So here are some clues to help you make an assessment about whether you might be a recycler. You do, those activities listed in the slide. That's sort of a clue that this is something you might want to concern yourself with. You may ask yourself some of these other questions. Yeah, do I do those actions that were alluded to back here? Sorting, cleaning, baling, shredding, that sort of thing. Do I create intermediate products, things that replace or substitute for virgin material in manufacturing, construction, or agricultural process? So I brought this up a little earlier as a preview, but pellets, flake, pulp, bales of metal, glass cullet, things that replace fuel, wood chips, compost, homogeneous mixtures used for direct land application, such as aggregate, road base, biosolids, biochar. If you create these intermediate products, you are most likely engaging in recycling and would need to report as a recycler or composter. So the de minimis threshold being 100 tons per quarter for reportable materials and 2,500 tons per quarter if you're exclusive construction, demolition, or inert debris. So here are some examples of entities we would think would be recycler/composter. Material recovery facilities that do not require a solid waste facilities permit, also known as a recycling center or clean MRF. Wastewater treatment plants producing biosolids would be reporting entity. Paper pulpers, textile fiber reclaimers, plastic reclaimers, shredders, grinders, flakers, and pelletizers, metal shredders, sorters, and processors, glass cullet manufacturers and beneficiators, beverage container recycling program recyclers or processors. And that's to the extent that they meet or exceed the de minimis tonnage threshold of 100 tons per quarter for the materials that they handle. And it's, we had a question come up during the past monthly meeting about the level of interaction between the beverage container program recyclers and RDRS, and it turns out that for many of these small recycling centers, they will not meet or exceed that de minimis tonnage threshold. Therefore, no level of interaction with the system. It's only most likely going to be the case that it's the processors of the material. They're going to handle enough volume to have to file a quarterly report under RDRS. So, just some confusion was. I think a little bit of confusion out there about whether this is replacing Doris. So this does not replace Doris. You would still need to, do all of that if you are interacting with Doris in order to get, appropriate reimbursement or whatever it is that Doris does. I'm not entirely familiar with everything that goes on in there, but if you're still expected to report in Doris, it's not suddenly you would stop using Doris and input that information into RDRS. You would probably need to, you would still continue to fill out your Doris, DR6 and 7, in addition to the quarterly reporting for RDRS. So just wanted to make that abundantly clear for the BCRP folks that we're interacting with. Just to continue on about additional entities that would fall under recycler/composter. Carpet collectors and recyclers, construction demolition and inert debris recyclers, chipping and grinding facilities and operations, medium volume C&D wood debris chipping and grinding facilities, C&D wood debris chipping and grinding facilities, automobile shredders, and then compostable material handling facilities and operations, colloquially known as composting facilities, composting research operations, in-vessel digestion facilities and operations. So we had a question about anaerobic digestion. If that anaerobic digestion facility or operation is how do I say this? If they are subject to the reporting requirements or not reporting requirements, but the operational regulations governing in-vessel or compostable material handling facilities, they would also expected to be reported in RDRS. Meaning so that's a long way of saying if you're excluded by the composting regs, or if you're excluded by the in-vessel digestion regs, meaning you're not considered that under those regulations, you would not be considered that under these regulations either. So we have some specific language in there about that. So if for whatever reason the gentlelady who asked prior, if her operation was not considered in anaerobic digestion according to our regulations, for some reason, there would not be a need to report in this system. However, if it were considered in-vessel digestion subject to our composting regulation or in-vessel regulations, they would need to, interact with our reporting requirements if they met or exceeded the de minimis tonnage threshold. Lastly, again, wastewater treatment plants who produce organic intermediate products, for instance, biosolids. However, if a wastewater treatment plant only produced sewage sludge or grit and screenings, that there's kind of a special exception for wastewater treatment plants that don't produce any intermediate products. So, I think we have a little bit of guidance on our website about that, specifically for wastewater treatment plants, but we are happy to follow up if any of those folks are participating today and would like to have, ask some further questions about that. So with respect to the reporting requirements for recyclers and composters, so we've broken it down by in-state versus out-of-state. And the out-of-state is, again, like I've been saying, almost identical to in-state with the small exception of sending into an out-of-state recycling or composting facility. We don't require the contact information of that out-of-state recycling and composting facility. So, I'll just cover the in-state, basically starting from the top row. Let's say we have an unfortunate circumstance where, as I alluded to, the recycler, they produce some bales of material that there's no market for, and it has to be sent to a disposal facility. And this is kind of the nightmare scenario, with the national sword and all of that. The regulations do require that, recyclers and composters sending material to solid waste disposal, we do require that they provide the tons by material type and RDRS contact information of the receiving facility for which solid waste has been sent for disposal. So they would indicate, for instance, 100 tons of baled, cardboard was sent to, Vasco Road landfill, and that would be how they would account for, anything that they basically had to dispose. It would be by material type. Now, there's not a need to characterize or further categorize material beyond how it was marketed or sent or how it left the facility. So it's not like you're going to take tweezers and analyze like what's, what exactly is being sent, what is the material? It's however it was sent. So if it's basically unsorted recyclables, you could define it as, mixed recyclables. There's not a need to go out of your way to further characterize any kind of material. It's only at the level of handling or only at the level of segregation at the time the material left the facility. So we're not engaging in a process where we're studying what's being thrown away in any greater detail than how it was actually, sent out the back door of the facility. So there's not going to be an additional burden to go ahead and define, what is the material. It's just however it left the facility. So I just want to make that abundantly clear for folks. There's not a need to, pick through and see what's being disposed and subsequently having to report that information to the state. Now, let's say they're sending it on for further processing. So taking a look one row down, let's say the recycler, they beneficiate the glass and then it's being sent to, another facility to do, some even more beneficiating or color sorting. Let's just, it's a weird example, but just, go with me. So they would indicate we sent, 400 tons of beneficiated glass, not color sorted, however it was sent out and however it was marketed, to this other facility that's doing the color sorting. So they would provide the RDRS number of the contact information of that receiving recycling and composting facility. Let's say the recycler composter takes bales of number one plastic and they wash and flake and pelletize that material, and then it's being sent to like a bottler, a blower, a manufacturer who has an extruder. Basically, you would indicate, however many tons of, plastic pellet or plastic flake was sent to that. It was not to each end user, but to end user category by region. So, you would indicate if that manufacturing facility were located in LA County, you would say 150 tons of plastic pellet were sent to end user category manufacturing and packaging in Los Angeles County. And if you sent to another facility in San Bernardino County, you would need to provide the tons sent to that, not by facility, not by customer, but by region. So just to give an example, 500 tons sent to manufacturing and packaging in LA County, 700 tons sent to manufacturing, packaging, end user in San Bernardino County. So that's how you would basically account for that. If the recycler or composter were sending non-green material for beneficial reuse, they would just provide the tons of that material, and then the RDRS contact information of the destination landfill, ostensibly because they're using beneficial reuse. It would most likely be a landfill. Now, same thing with green material beneficial reuse. At this point, the jurisdiction, if asked by the receiving facility, would simply be the facility with, the jurisdiction within which the facility is located. In other words, host assign. Now, recyclable material, if intermediate products are sent to a broker or transporter, you would simply indicate that you sold 700 tons of plastic flake to broker, and provide the contact information, RDRS number of that entity. Right, so out of state I already covered. It's basically the same, minus the recycling and composting. You don't have to provide the RDRS number contact information. Other than that, it's basic. It is the same as in-state. All right, let's see. Let's take any questions that you may have at this point about recycler or composter. Let's go to Mr. Chandler. And we got the mic coming.
So, to use your example of material that's sent to an end user category by region, if you have multiple, I just want to be clear on this, is what I think I hear you saying, if you have multiple end user customers, let's say 3 sheet manufacturers that you send your flake to, and they're all in the same region, that would require one report. Is that right? So you would, because you're not entering the RDS number, so you would just say manufacturer of sheet, LA County, and you could aggregate all of those shipments.
Correct, 100% correct. Yeah, so you would aggregate all of those 3 together into one sort of data point. And if, let's say, there were another 3 in San Bernardino County, you would provide the tons of to send to all of those in San Bernardino County.
And on an administrative question that's more generic to this whole thing, you often refer to as, and then the system will auto-populate. So is this a CalRecycle homegrown kind of software application that we're entering into, this whole reporting system, this RDS system? In other words, have you guys tested this pretty thoroughly, and are the bugs worked out, or there's going to be glitches in all of this kind of online auto-fill type reporting? But I'm just curious how much of this has been, gone through a beta phase, and we're pretty confident that when you roll this out in October, we won't be lighting up the phones with, well, this didn't auto-report, or this field didn't work. So can you share a little bit more how you developed this whole system?
I sure can, and thanks for the question. It's an important one, and I want to make sure I give you a thorough response. So to begin with, this system was developed in-house. It's not contracted out. It's by our programming staff here at CalRecycle, and let's see. With respect to the autofill, all of that information is actually taken from other users' registration, meaning in order for any information to be autofilled, that information had to be typed in by a human who ran that facility. And so all that information they swear is accurate about their facility. So once they type in the name of their facility, there'll be assigned an RDRS number, and all of their contact information, that sort of thing, will be, available for the public or for other entities to use as a lookup or reference. So any information that would be autofilled would be, have been approved by that facility who created their profile. So that information should be relatively robust. We wouldn't be penalizing anyone for any information that is autofilled and turns out to be incorrect because it's pulling the data from elsewhere. So I think we say in the regulations that we don't penalize a reporting entity. We would never penalize a reporting entity for mistakes submitted by another entity who relied on that. So in terms with respect to the beta testing and the software development and the bugs and everything, that's sort of what we're undertaking at the present moment. That's why the reporting system isn't yet live for folks. We're sort of testing how the information feeds from one entity to another, and looking at those in detail, making sure all the information's transferred. I think we haven't invited some stakeholders to participate with us in the past with regard to testing the registration module, which is now live and shouldn't contain very many errors. But we plan on doing the similar process with the actual reporting module, having some preliminary beta testing with some selected stakeholder groups or industry participants. I think the time frame on that kind of get a little bit pushed back just because of the way things have been going with the system development, but we are really eager and hot to trot to invite people to test and make sure that we iron all the bugs out. And we also want to have some time to take in the results of some of those focus groups or stakeholder meetings and then incorporate those changes in. So we're going to have some preliminary sort of alpha testing with our ITS and then internally with staff. And then at that point, we're going to go through a round of changes. Then we'll sort of put it in beta and then, make that available for some stakeholders or members of the public to try out and see if they can try to break the system or, iron out the bugs. So if anybody's interested in participating in that process, please email the RDRS inbox or come talk to me afterwards, and we'll see if we can help you out and get you involved, because, we want to have engagement and participation with this, and we don't want to be having the phones all lit up with problems. So we're definitely aware of that and want to make sure that we have a finished product that is in good shape. So that's big. That's like priority number one for us. So thanks very much. Anything else from in the room? Otherwise, we'll see if there's some from online.
So we do have a question about out-of-state materials. Republic Services bails all their material and sells it to a broker. Do we need to separate by region and state if it goes out of state?
So if the broker, if it's sold to the broker has possession of it, the broker would need to report on the final destination of that material. You're only responsible for indicating that it was, the material was either sold or transferred to a broker. And what they do with it, is their business. It's not that you're not following them around, asking them where they're taking, your material. Once it's sold to them, that basically ends your involvement with the material. So at that point, going forward, the broker would be responsible for any of the final destination, if that sort of gets at it.
Sounds like that answers the question.
Anything else?
That's all questions from online.
All right. We got one more from Mr. Chandler.
You mentioned water treatment and did so in the context of wastewater treatment facilities, biosolids. If you're a processor of, let's say, a material, and as a byproduct, you treat water and then put it back into the municipal water system after it's been properly treated, and that's all done through proper permitting. Does that, and it's not, there's no product there except it's a byproduct. That doesn't get covered under this, does it? Or do you have to go to the de minimis levels again on how much you're putting of treated water back into the municipal system? In other words, speak a little bit more about treatment of wastewater when it's a secondary, ancillary function of your overall processing. And the solids that are pulled out of it.
Sure, be happy to. Excellent question, as always. With respect to this, dewatering or, the kind of processes involved with wastewater treatment plant. So basically, what we define as an intermediate product for the wastewater treatment plant is biosolids, that are treated to meet the Title 40 CFR Part 503 standards for vector and pathogen reduction. Basically, if it's not treated to that level, it would be defined as sewage sludge, which we would consider solid waste and not a organic intermediate product. It's only the case, wastewater treatment plants only report when they send off, 100 tons or more of intermediate product, which is specifically defined as like biosolids. If they weren't creating that in excess that met or exceeded that 100-ton threshold, chances are they wouldn't have to report. So those other water treatment activities, if they're subsequently put back into the water supply or that sort of thing, that doesn't sound like it's within the realm of reporting. It's only the reporting on the actual biosolids that have been treated to those standards that are then sent to land application is what we're really concerning ourselves with. What we want to track is basically the destination of biosolids to land spreading, and other kind of products that are produced from intermediate or from wastewater treatment plant. If it's solid waste and stuff, that's normally accounted for through the municipal infrastructure and will be reported upon by other entities. So it's really just the biosolids. Thank you. All right, so let's see how we're doing on time here. We are just at 11, so it's time to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11:12. So please come back then. Thank you very much. folks. Thanks for bearing with us for the break. We're going to pick it back up and cover the last section and then any other further questions that you may have. So just to recap what we did briefly before the break, we looked at the reporting requirements for recyclers and composters and took some questions from the audience and from online about how to report and what information needs to be part of the quarterly report. So now we'll turn our attention to the final reporting entity type that is in RDRS, and that's brokers and transporters. These entities take material from a reporting entity and sell or transfer them to other reporting entities, to end users, or to out-of-state. So virtually the same reporting requirements as recyclers and composters. You only report on outbound. And brokers and transporters only report if they determine the destination of the material that is being sent. So who's in entities who sell or transfer 100 tons of material for which they controlled and determine the destination? Who's out? Brokers and transporters who simply move or facilitate transactions from a reporting entity but do not determine the destination of that material. In other words, they're basically paid to drive from one place to another, and they don't. They're not in control of that material. They're just moving it. They don't have a reporting obligation. So this is basically the same as the couple slides ago, where we talked about reporting requirements for recyclers and composters. So let's say they've for whatever reason purchased solid waste, and now they're sending it to disposal. They would provide tons by material type, and which is solid waste, and the RDRS number, contact information of the receiving disposal facility. Let's say they have purchased some unprocessed material, and they're taking it to a recycling and composting facility for processing. They're going to report the tons by material type that they sent to that facility and their receiving facility's contact information. Let's say they're taking it to end user. So let's say they purchase I don't know, for whatever reason, they control and determine the destination of biosolids from a wastewater treatment plant. So the wastewater treatment plant simply, maybe they pay the broker transporter to take the material wherever, and basically once they give it to the broker, it's up to the broker or transporter to determine where that goes. So they would provide that when it's sent to end user, they'd provide the tons by material type, so biosolids, and end user category of land application by region. Let's just say Kern County. So that would be how you would account for those as a broker transporter. Non-green beneficial reuse and green beneficial reuse, similar, tons by material type, and RDRS number, contact information of the receiving landfill. And then if it's sent to another broker, again, tons by material type, RDRS, contact info of that broker. Out of state is going to be pretty much the same, minus, again, recycling and composting. We don't require out of state contact information for the out of state recycling facilities. So if you were to, if as a broker send material out of state for recycling, you would indicate basically 500 tons was sent to Nevada or Indonesia or wherever. of that material type. So the other ones are analogous to in-state, so I'm not going to cover that once again. So that essentially brings us to more or less the conclusion of this workshop presentation. Now I want to take, we have about 40 minutes now, so if anyone has thought of any questions during the break or stuff like that, we'll have plenty of time to, shed some light on some of those questions that you may have. Anything from in the room? Nope. Please, online, go ahead.
So we have two questions from online. One is a general question about if there is or will be a public search for RDRS numbers.
I think we're considering that right now. No definitive guidance has been given. I think we're still looking at that, and I don't think anything necessarily precludes that information from being released per se, but we just want to make sure that we're not, that we're, making sure we cover all our bases before we release that information. In any event, people who have a reporting obligation, who've registered and are going to fill out quarterly reports, they will certainly have access to, a lookup for the RDRS, a list of registered RDRS entities. So, when it comes time to file the quarterly report, as I've been saying, they can try their hand at auto-filling the facility and then basically do kind of a search based on the name or possibly other form fields, and then it will return the RDRS number associated with that business, facility, or operation. So long story short, we don't have that ability or that functionality at the present moment. We're certainly investigating, the feasibility or possibility of including that, of a public lookup of registered RDRS entities. So yeah, we can definitely follow up on that and let the individual know one way or the other how we intend to proceed with that. And it's not like it's again, I'm not an attorney, but this is not necessarily privileged information or business confidential information. You can look up, facilities in the solid waste information system and get their Swiss number. So this is kind of similar to that. I don't see any obvious reason why we wouldn't have that feature. But I don't want to say definitively, yes, we're going to have it. I don't see any barriers to including it. So it's something that we are in the process of investigating.
Thank you. Another question is, when a recycling or composting facility has residuals that are sent to a landfill, are those residuals assigned a jurisdiction of origin based on the percentages of the recycling or composting material that was received at the facility, or would the jurisdiction of origin be assigned to the landfill that the residuals are sent to?
Great question, whomever that was. So this is kind of a complicated issue. So we're a bit hamstrung by in terms of our legal authority to have recyclers. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. The recyclers are not, they're not basically authorized to collect, jurisdiction of origin for inbound recyclable materials pursuant to AB 901 reporting. Now, if there are franchise agreements or local ordinances or other things that would compel them to get the jurisdiction of information for the inbound recyclables, that's kind of a different story. We're only talking about what does the state require with respect to the jurisdiction of origin. We don't have the authority to compel recyclers and composters to ask about the origin, jurisdiction of origin for recyclable material. Therefore, we cannot expect the recyclable material coming out of a recycling facility to have jurisdiction of origin information associated with it if they're not required to collect that pursuant to AB 901. So the long story short is that when the recycling facility sends that material to the residuals to disposal, the disposal facility, like when they bring, as is the case when any kind of waste is brought in from direct haul, they would ask, where is the waste from? The response to that question would be the jurisdiction within which the facility or operation is located. So if the recycling facility is located in unincorporated Kings County, they would say the waste is coming from unincorporated Kings County, and the receiving solid waste facility would record that information as that solid waste as being the jurisdiction of origin is from unincorporated Kings County. That's the letter of the law. So essentially, to answer the question, the jurisdiction of that residual material is going to be, by default, the host assigned, or the jurisdiction within which the facility or operation is located. So we're investigating sort of ways to account for, these regional facilities wherein a lot of out of jurisdiction material is being brought for processing, and then they're kind of being, for whatever reason, they're essentially stuck with that residual waste being assigned to them. So this is where we would interface with our local assistance market development branch and potentially look into ways to modify the disposal down for annual reporting purposes in a way that would account for what actually took place, meaning where the recyclables were brought from. But that's more sort of a jurisdictional aspect, and that this question kind of gets more into the jurisdictional aspects of it. So we're still I think some of this is still in process to some extent, and it would be kind of on a case-by-case basis that we would look into potential, maybe disposal reductions or modifications down, if to the extent that there's more granular information that the jurisdiction can provide about where the recyclables actually originated from. So we're putting together a process to account for kind of those residual waste tonnages so that the host jurisdiction is not unduly associated with those tons that they may not even have been responsible for generating. It's only the fact that the facility is located in their jurisdiction that they're essentially being stuck with those residual tons. We're aware of this, and we're happy to work with the affected jurisdictions to figure out a mutually agreeable solution for some of these issues. And I want to highlight that this is we're limited in what ability we can in the data that we can collect for AB 901 on the recycling side, and this was basically a result of that. So happy to clarify further from there for individuals who are needing more clarification about that.
No more questions from online.
Excellent. Let's see if there are any final thoughts from in the room. Yes, Mr. Chandler. Oh, one moment. We're getting the.
This is a question I should know the answer, so I apologize in advance. But speaking of the RDS numbers, are the RDS numbers generated at the time of pre-registration? So if you're pre-registered, you'll have your RDS number now.
Yes, correct. When the registration has been completed by the facility, it'll be generated. One will be generated, basically sequentially.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, let's go to this gentlelady here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure how to phrase the question, so I'm just going to ask it and perhaps we can refix it. So what is the reporting responsibility or the reporting role for like the city, who is the solid recycling and solid waste division? Our material, we pick up our materials, they go to other places. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm very clear on what we're responsible for reporting back to the state.
Excellent question, ma'am. If the city does not operate a facility, that's been mentioned in one of these slides, or they basically just do the hauling, or they take the material to a facility. So contract haulers don't report on when they take material to in-state. It's only out-of-state. So I would suspect that there would not be very much of a role at all, probably no role for the city in terms of being responsible for reporting, if to the extent that you don't run a facility or you only haul material to in-state facilities. So yeah, it's only the facilities that are actually handling the material that would have a need to interface with the system.
If that facility then transfers materials out of state, is it that facility or is it us that has the responsibility to report?
And you don't operate the facility, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's just the facility who would be responsible and not anyone who's bringing material there. So hopefully that simplifies things. Oh, you're quite welcome, ma'am. No, that's a lot of recycling coordinators have, over the course of this process, emailed and said, what do I have to do? And it turns out there's really not a whole lot there. However, we are going to enable, and I think this will be starting next year, the ability for jurisdictions to, like cities and counties and whatnot, to create a profile. It wouldn't be any reporting involved, but this is basically you could create a web pass and get into RDRS, and there would be some reports available that will basically say, how much waste over the various quarters was assigned to your county, how kind of a little limited information about kind of the flow of recyclables. So kind of some summary statistics will be available to jurisdictions about what kind of data is being reported that is associated with them. And for that reason, is to enable jurisdictions to basically get a little bit better handle on the disposal tons that they're being attributed, so that on a quarterly basis as opposed to a yearly basis, so that for each quarter you look back a couple weeks after the deadline of that quarter and say, and see, how many tons were assigned to your city. And then if there are any, big issues, you can follow up and request more information or work with us to see what's going on. So, we will have some ability for jurisdictions to interface with RDRS, but unless there's an actual reporting obligation, this is basically just to view reports and things. Excellent question, though. Thank you. All right. So, please, Mr. Sweetser.
Yes, Larry Sweetser on behalf of the rural counties. Is the list of RDS RS numbers available for others to look at, like public information, so we can make our own list, because we have to start reporting now?
I don't think that information is quite available as of right now. That kind of gets into the earlier question from the online. I don't, I'm not really aware of necessarily any barriers that would prevent us from getting that out, but we'll just need to sort of run that up the chain and see the best way that we can provide that information. So, yeah, I mean, I think it is public information, so we should be able to get that out, or at least have some kind of public lookup. I just want to, I can't say for sure, but I think that is indeed coming at some point, yes. And in any event, if you have a reporting obligation, at the very least, bottom line, the people who have a reporting obligation would be able to look it up in the system. All right, so seems like most people have sort of cleared out. I want to thank everyone for their attention to the presentation. I know some of the information has been a little bit repetitive, but again, we wanted to take the opportunity to, really engage with the industry and our stakeholders, our valued industry partners, give them an opportunity to ask any remaining questions that they might have, or clear up any confusion with the reporting aspects of the system. So, with that respect, please continue to engage with us, send in your questions. If you have any confusion, we definitely want to know about it. We're also continuing to learn from this process as well. So we are appreciative to everyone for paying attention and for hanging in there. So we'll probably end up, as the system continues to mature and be closer to final production, we'll start to offer some new trainings that have actually how to get into the system and fill in this information that we've been talking about. So, a lot of the couple previous workshops have been fairly abstract in the sense of like, if you handle this, here's how you would report it. In the subsequent workshops, we're going to be getting a little bit more concrete as far as, let's say you have, you're sending out this and this and this, and here's how you would report that and type it into the system. Or, here's at least a visualization of what that would look like. So as soon as we're ready to get to that juncture, we'll be sharing that with the regulated community. So again, thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.